On Mother's Day, I hosted lunch for my son and his wife. After years of my financial support, she called me a controlling old hag to my face. My son just sat there silent. I calmly told them to leave. They'll soon learn what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you. This is just the beginning. Like, share, and tell me where you are listening from. The aroma of slow-roasted chicken and fresh herbs filled Eleanor's kitchen, a comforting scent that usually promised warmth and togetherness. This Mother's Day, she had poured 3 meticulous hours into preparing lunch, each step a small act of love. She carefully arranged the vibrant salad, a mosaic of greens and colorful vegetables, and put the finishing touches on the lemon tart, its golden crust glistening. To Eleanor, these gatherings were more than just meals. They were tangible expressions of family, continuity, and the unbreakable bonds she cherished. Especially after Arthur's sudden passing years ago, these moments with Daniel, her only son, had become the anchors of her life. She longed for the easy laughter and shared stories that defined her happiest memories, hoping to recreate them today. Her dining room, usually reserved for special occasions, glowed with an inviting elegance. The antique mahogany table, a family heirloom, was set with the delicate crystal stemware inherited from her grandmother, each glass catching the morning light like a tiny prism. A centerpiece of cheerful yellow tulips, Clara's favorite, brought a splash of spring color, a deliberate choice meant to please her daughter-in-law. Eleanor had even polished the silver, a ritual that connected her to generations past. Everything was perfect, or so she hoped, for Daniel and Clara's arrival. The doorbell chimed precisely at 1 o'clock. Eleanor's heart gave a hopeful flutter. She smoothed her dress, a floral print she knew Daniel liked, and walked to the door, a smile ready on her lips. Daniel stood there, a lanky figure who still carried a hint of the boy she remembered, but whose shoulders seemed to sag a little more these days. He offered a quick, almost perfunctory, "Hi, Mom," before stepping aside. Behind him, Clara emerged, a sleek, immaculately dressed woman whose sharp features and perfectly styled blonde hair always seemed to Eleanor to be on guard. Clara offered no greeting, no smile, simply a cool, appraising glance that swept over Eleanor before moving to the dining room beyond. Her silence felt like a chill wind. Clara walked directly into the dining room, her heels clicking crisply on the polished hardwood. "It's quite warm in here, isn't it, Eleanor?" she remarked, her tone more a statement than a question, as she fanned herself with a slender hand. She didn't wait for a reply, instead turning her attention to the room. "And this wallpaper, so traditional. Have you ever considered something a little more modern, perhaps a lighter shade to open up the space?" Her words, delivered with an air of casual dismissal, chipped away at Eleanor's carefully constructed ambiance. Eleanor felt a familiar knot tighten in her stomach. She swallowed the immediate retort, reminding herself of the occasion, of her son, and of the unspoken arrangement that had allowed Daniel and Clara to live comfortably for years. She had been their financial bedrock, quietly footing bills, covering rent shortfalls, and occasionally even helping with Clara's extravagant purchases, all without a word of complaint. As they sat down, Daniel took his usual seat, but his eyes, once so full of life and directness, now seemed to dart nervously between his mother and his wife. Since Clara had entered their lives, Eleanor had noticed a gradual shift in Daniel. He had become quieter, his once vibrant spirit slowly dimming into a kind of weary complacency. He rarely spoke up anymore, especially when Clara was around. It saddened her deeply, this muted version of her son. Eleanor tried to steer the conversation to lighter topics, asking about their week, but Clara quickly interjected. "We have some exciting news, Eleanor," she announced, flashing a triumphant smile at Daniel, who merely offered a weak, obliging grin. "We've been looking at apartments." Eleanor's eyebrows subtly rose. "Oh? Are you thinking of moving?" Their current apartment, though not grand, was perfectly adequate for a couple, and the rent was manageable, largely thanks to her supplemental help. She immediately felt a tremor of concern. Moving meant new expenses, increased rent, furnishing. Given their track record, she wondered how they planned to manage. Clara leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with a possessive pride. "We found an absolutely stunning place downtown. 2 bedrooms, a fantastic view of the city, and the most incredible amenities. A rooftop pool, a gym, even a concierge service. It's truly magnificent. She described the unit in lavish detail, a portrait of urban luxury that sounded far beyond what Daniel's modest salary, even combined with Clara's sporadic interior design business, income could possibly sustain. That sounds wonderful, dear, Eleanor said, trying to keep her voice even. But downtown apartments can be quite expensive. Are you sure you've budgeted for something of that scale? The question, though gentle, hung in the air like an unwelcome intruder. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Clara's smile vanished, replaced by a steely glint. Eleanor, must you always turn every conversation into a lecture about money? It's Mother's Day, not a financial audit. You're always lording your wealth over us, reminding us of what you have and we don't. Her voice had dropped, laced with a venomous edge. A sharp pain pierced Eleanor's chest. Lording my wealth? She repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Clara, do you have any idea how hard I worked after Arthur died? How I scrimped and saved, often going without, just to make sure Daniel had every opportunity. I sold almost everything of value, kept only a few precious heirlooms, and started working extra shifts just to keep our heads above water. I did it all for him so he wouldn't feel the absence of his father any more keenly than he already did. Her eyes welled up slightly, the memories still raw after all these years. Clara scoffed, cutting her off dismissively. Oh, please. Spare us the sob story. You weren't helping us, Eleanor. You were controlling us. Every gift, every loan, every suggestion comes with strings attached. You want to dictate our lives, tell us how to spend our money, where to live, what decisions to make. She punctuated her words with sharp gestures, her anger escalating. Eleanor took a deep breath, trying to calm the tempest rising within her. If you're so concerned about my control over your finances, Clara, perhaps you should consider contributing more substantially yourself. An apartment like that requires a steady income. Your interior design business seems to be more of a hobby than a source of reliable funds. The words were out before she could temper them, a frustration born of years of watching Clara spend without consequence. Clara exploded. Her face flushed a furious red, her eyes narrowed to slits. How dare you? My business is legitimate, and who are you to judge anyway? You're just a controlling old hag who can't stand to see her son live his own life. You're a shrew, Eleanor, a bitter, meddling shrew. The insults, delivered with such vitriol, hung in the silence. Eleanor looked at Daniel, her son, whose face was pale, his gaze fixed on his plate, utterly silent. He offered no defense, no comfort, not even a flinch. In that moment, something inside Eleanor snapped. The years of tolerance, of quiet sacrifice, of trying to maintain peace, shattered. Get out, she said, her voice surprisingly calm, though her hands trembled beneath the table. Both of you, get out of my house. The heavy silence that fell after Daniel and Clara left was a stark contrast to the angry words that had just been exchanged. Eleanor stood in her immaculate dining room, the scent of her uneaten Mother's Day lunch now tinged with the bitter smell of betrayal. She looked at the gleaming crystal, the yellow tulips, the carefully prepared meal, and a cold resolve settled over her. If they saw her merely as a bank, a bottomless well of funds to be tapped at their convenience, then it was time to close the account. The thought was sharp, decisive, a steel blade cutting through the emotional tangle. Sleep refused to come that night. Eleanor tossed and turned, the soft hum of the refrigerator in the quiet house doing little to soothe her restless mind. Clara's venomous words echoed in her ears, controlling old hag. Shrew. But it was Daniel's silence that truly haunted her. His inert presence at the table, his downcast eyes, spoke volumes. It was not just an absence of support. It felt like an implicit agreement with Clara's cruel accusations. How could her son, the boy she had sacrificed so much for, stand by and watch his mother be verbally abused? The image of his blank face was a raw wound, keeping her awake until the first slivers of dawn crept through her bedroom window. The next morning the phone rang, its shrill noise piercing the quiet. It was Daniel. Mom, about yesterday, he began, his voice hesitant, almost anemic. Clara was just stressed. She didn't mean it. You know how she gets when she's upset. He made excuses, carefully avoiding any direct apology from Clara or even from himself for his inaction. Eleanor listened, her heart aching, but she offered no verbal response. His words felt hollow, a performative gesture devoid of genuine remorse. After a moment, she quietly hung up, the click of the receiver sounding final in her ears. Instead of dwelling on the conversation, Eleanor walked to her study, a small, cozy room filled with books and cherished photographs. She sat at her desk, her fingers, usually so adept at gardening and baking, now moved with a determined precision as she logged into her online banking portal. The screen glowed, displaying years of financial history, a silent testament to her generosity. Her eyes immediately sought out the recurring monthly transfer. $3,000 every single month, like clockwork. What had started as a temporary measure to help them get on their feet after Daniel's first job didn't quite cover their rent had somehow morphed into a permanent fixture, an unspoken expectation. She remembered the early days after Arthur's death. The grief had been a heavy blanket, but Eleanor had refused to let it smother her son's future. She'd worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, her hands raw from cleaning, her mind exhausted from bookkeeping. She'd sold her mother's antique watch, a painful but necessary sacrifice, to pay for Daniel's tuition. Every penny had been carefully managed, every decision made with Daniel's well-being at its core. She never wanted him to feel the pinch of poverty, the shame of not having enough. She had believed she was building a stable foundation for him, not an expectation of perpetual dependency. Scrolling through the transactions, Eleanor's gaze sharpened. Her $3,000 deposits consistently landed in their account around the first of each month. And then, a few days later, she noted a pattern of expenditures. Designer handbags, expensive restaurant meals, luxury travel bookings, high-end electronics. These were not the expenses of a couple struggling to make ends meet, but of people living a lifestyle far beyond their declared income. It was clear now her help was not covering necessities, it was funding luxuries. The phone rang again, this time displaying Clara's name. Eleanor hesitated, then answered. "Eleanor," Clara's voice chirped, astonishingly bright and devoid of any acknowledgement of yesterday's blow-up. "We need the deposit for the new apartment. The landlord wants it by Friday, and it's a substantial amount. Can you transfer it by tomorrow morning?" Her tone was a blend of expectation and entitlement, as if the conversation of the previous day had never happened, as if Eleanor was simply a transaction machine. Eleanor listened, a cold clarity settling over her. She thought about Daniel, the bright-eyed boy who used to bring her wildflowers and draw her clumsy but heartfelt Mother's Day cards. He had been thoughtful, appreciative, full of aspirations. Now he was a silent shadow, a man whose main communication with his mother revolved around money. Clara had not just married her son, she had, in a subtle, insidious way, consumed him, transforming him into a financially dependent echo of his former self. Shortly after, Daniel called once more. This time his voice was laced with a genuine strain, a hint of desperation. "Mom, I'm so sorry about yesterday. Clara, she really didn't mean those things. We were just under a lot of pressure." It was an apology finally, but it was quickly overshadowed. "Look, about the apartment. We really love it. It's perfect for us. We just need a little help with the deposit. Can you?" Eleanor cut him off, her voice steady. "Daniel, do you know how much money I've given you and Clara over the years?" There was a beat of silence on the other end. "Mom, we're really grateful." "I'm not asking for gratitude, Daniel. I'm asking if you know the figure." Eleanor paused, letting the weight of her next words settle. "Over the past 5 years, I have transferred a total of $180,000 to your account. Not as loans, Daniel, as gifts to help you build a life." Another silence, longer this time. Then Daniel's voice, defensive, tinged with a wounded pride. "We always appreciated it, Mom. We really did. It's just, Clara, she has expensive tastes, and her business isn't always consistent. It's hard to keep up." He was blaming Clara, deflecting responsibility, just as he had done yesterday. "I need some time, Daniel," Eleanor said, her voice firm. "Time to think about everything." She hung up before he could argue further. Eleanor walked out to her small, meticulously tended garden. She sat on the weathered wooden bench, surrounded by the vibrant blooms and the gentle hum of bees. She looked at her hands, the lines etched by years of hard work, the faint scent of soil still clinging to her skin. Her dreams of traveling, of taking a cooking class in Italy, of finally upgrading her ancient car, had always been deferred. Always later, always for Daniel's future. That future now looked like a bottomless pit of demands. By evening, the garden was bathed in the soft glow of twilight. Eleanor returned to her study, her mind clear, her resolve hardened. She logged back into her banking portal. With a click, she canceled the automatic monthly transfer to Daniel's account. Then, with another series of clicks, she moved the majority of her savings into a long-term certificate of deposit, funds that would be inaccessible for a set period. She kept only a small, manageable amount in her checking account for immediate needs. As she closed the laptop, a strange, quiet peace settled over her. The storm was coming, she knew. But for the first time in a very long time, Eleanor felt like she was steering her own ship, not merely a passenger on a course dictated by others. The days that followed Mother's Day were surprisingly peaceful for Eleanor. For 2 glorious mornings, she woke without the usual low thrum of anxiety. She spent hours in her garden, hands buried in the rich soil, finding solace in the rhythmic act of pruning and planting. The vibrant colors of her blooming hydrangeas and fragrant roses seemed to reflect her own renewed sense of purpose. In the afternoon, she would sit with a cup of tea, poring over brochures for an Alaskan cruise she had always dreamed of taking, picturing herself standing on the deck, watching glaciers calve into the icy waters. The quiet hum of her life, unburdened by the unspoken expectation of constant giving, was a balm to her soul. This fragile peace shattered on the 3rd morning. The phone rang, startling her as she was enjoying her coffee. It was Daniel, his voice not hesitant or apologetic this time, but sharp with unadulterated anger. "Mom, what the hell happened? The rent didn't go through. Why did you stop the transfer?" His voice was loud enough that she had to hold the receiver a little away from her ear. Eleanor took a slow, deliberate sip of her coffee, allowing the warmth to spread through her. "Daniel," she said, her voice calm and even, a stark contrast to his agitation. "This isn't a punishment. It's a boundary." There was a confused pause on the other end. A, a boundary? What are you even talking about? You've never had boundaries before, Mom. You've always helped us. This is completely out of character. His words highlighted the very core of the problem. Her generosity had been so consistent, so limitless, that it had become the norm, erasing any concept of boundaries for them. "Exactly, Daniel," Eleanor replied, her gaze fixed on a small bird hopping outside her window. "And I'm uncomfortable with that arrangement. I'm making changes in my life, and that includes my financial commitments." But, but Mom, you can't just do that." Daniel's voice was tinged with panic now. "We've built our lives around those checks. That money is crucial for our rent, for our expenses. We can't afford the apartment without it." The admission was stark, laying bare the full extent of their dependency. They hadn't just relied on her, they had structured their entire existence around her money. Eleanor felt a fresh wave of disappointment wash over her. "Daniel, you're 34 years old," she stated, her voice hardening slightly. "Are you really telling me you've built your adult life around a monthly check from your mother?" He bristled. "This isn't fair, Mom. This is about Clara, isn't it? You've never liked her. You're just doing this to get back at her." The familiar deflection, the shifting of blame, felt like a slap. "This is not about whether I like Clara, Daniel," Eleanor countered, her patience wearing thin. "This is about the $180,000 I have given you over the years, and the absolute disrespect I received on Mother's Day. Neither you nor Clara has offered a genuine apology for her behavior or for your silence in the face of it." The truth, stark and unyielding, hung between them. A strained silence followed. Then, Daniel's voice, small and defeated, asked, "So what are we supposed to do, Mom?" It was a question born of helplessness, an expectation that she would provide the solution, just as she always had. Eleanor closed her eyes for a brief moment. "You'll figure it out, Daniel," she said simply. And then, without waiting for a reply, she gently placed the receiver back in its cradle. Barely an hour later, the phone rang again. It was Clara. Her voice, usually sharp, was now dripping with a syrupy sweetness that Eleanor immediately distrusted. "Eleanor, darling, I am so terribly sorry about Mother's Day. I've just been under so much stress with a difficult design client, and I took it out on you. It was completely out of line. Can you ever forgive me? Her performance was almost theatrical, a stark contrast to her genuine anger just days before. Eleanor could hear the calculated insincerity in every word. Clara, Eleanor began, cutting through the saccharine facade, my financial commitments have changed. The sweetness vanished instantly. Changed? What does that mean? You're not giving us the money for the apartment deposit, are you? Are you really going to punish Daniel because I said a few things I regret? You vindictive old woman! The mask had fallen, revealing the true face of her fury. I treated you like an ATM, Clara, Eleanor stated calmly, letting the words resonate. And that has to stop. A furious gasp was her only reply before Clara launched into a stream of profanities, her voice rising to a shrill shriek that made Eleanor pull the phone away from her ear. Finally, Clara disconnected with a violent click. No sooner had Eleanor put the phone down than it started buzzing again. It wasn't Daniel or Clara this time, but a flurry of calls from various relatives, her sister Margaret, her cousin Helen, even a distant aunt. Clara's grapevine was efficient, and the narrative she was spinning was already taking root. Eleanor ignored most of them, letting the calls go to voicemail. Then her oldest friend, Evelyn, called. Eleanor answered, a weariness settling over her. Eleanor, honey, are you all right? Evelyn's voice was laced with genuine concern. Clara just called me, practically in hysterics. She said you're having some kind of breakdown, cutting them off, acting completely erratically. She said you told them you hated her. A breakdown? Eleanor repeated, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. I'm having a breakthrough, Evelyn. And then Eleanor poured out the entire story. The Mother's Day lunch, Clara's insults, Daniel's silence, the years of financial support, the shocking discovery of their luxury spending, and the subsequent confrontations. Evelyn listened patiently, without interruption. When Eleanor finished, a long silence stretched between them before Evelyn spoke. Eleanor, she said, her voice firm and unwavering, you did the right thing. It's about damn time. You are not an ATM, and you certainly don't deserve that kind of treatment. It's going to be rough, but I'm with you every step of the way. Evelyn's unwavering support was a much-needed anchor in the swirling storm. Eleanor felt a wave of relief wash over her, knowing she wasn't alone. Despite Evelyn's staunch support, a gnawing unease lingered. Eleanor needed to see for herself. She drove to the upscale mall, a place she rarely frequented, its gleaming facades and designer boutiques a world away from her quiet garden. She parked discreetly and waited, scanning the entrances. After a short while, she spotted Clara. Dressed in what looked like a new designer outfit, Clara laughed gaily with a group of equally well-dressed friends, bags from high-end stores swinging from their arms. They headed straight for an expensive cafe, their conversation punctuated by the clinking of glasses. Eleanor watched, a cold certainty settling in her gut. There was no sign of financial distress here, no hint of the panic Daniel had conveyed. This was simply a lifestyle, funded by her. 2 weeks passed, punctuated by a barrage of increasingly hostile messages and desperate voicemails from Daniel and Clara. Clara's initial syrupy apologies had quickly devolved into angry demands and thinly veiled threats. Daniel's messages fluctuated between pleading and outright anger, his tone a whirlwind of emotional manipulation. The extended family, well primed by Clara's dramatic account, also began to weigh in. Calls and texts from concerned aunts and cousins painted Eleanor as an unstable woman, perhaps experiencing a mental breakdown in her retirement. They urged her to talk sense into Daniel and Clara, implying Eleanor was the one at fault. Then a text from Daniel arrived, curt and unavoidable. Family dinner at our place tonight, 7 p.m. Everyone will be there. We need to talk about what's going on with you. Eleanor read the message, a wry smile playing on her lips. An intervention. How predictable. But instead of fear, a steely resolve settled in. She remembered her mother's adage, a mantra passed down through generations of strong women. Never run from a fight you know you can win. She looked at her phone for a moment, then typed a single word. Fine. At precisely 7 o'clock, Eleanor stood outside Daniel and Clara's expensive apartment. the one whose substantial deposit she had refused to cover. The building was sleek, modern, its polished chrome and glass reflecting the city lights. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and rang the doorbell. Daniel opened the door, his face a mixture of apprehension and forced politeness. His eyes flickered, betraying his nervousness. "Mom, come in." As Eleanor stepped inside, her gaze swept across the lavish living room. It was furnished with sleek, minimalist pieces, clearly expensive, and arranged with an eye for dramatic effect. No doubt Clara's interior design touch. Gathered on the plush sofas were David, Daniel's cousin, Sarah, David's wife, Carol, Eleanor's sister, and to Eleanor's surprise, Great Aunt Beatrice, a formidable woman in her late 80s known for her blunt honesty. Clara emerged from the kitchen, a flawless smile plastered on her face, playing the role of the perfect hostess. "Eleanor, so glad you could make it," she chirped, her voice eerily sweet. She held out a glass of wine. "Can I get you some Merlot? It's that lovely one you gave us for Christmas." Eleanor's eyes met Clara's, a silent acknowledgement passing between them of the irony. Eleanor accepted the glass, but her smile was thin. "No need for pleasantries, Clara. Why have I been summoned?" She didn't mince words, cutting straight to the heart of the matter. David, ever the diplomat, cleared his throat. "Eleanor, we're all just worried about you. You've been acting differently lately." "Worried about me," Eleanor repeated, her gaze sweeping over the assembled family. "Or worried about the fact that my money isn't flowing into Daniel and Clara's account anymore?" Daniel quickly interjected, trying to smooth things over. "Mom, this isn't about money, it's about family. We just want to understand why you're shutting us out." Eleanor turned her gaze directly to Daniel. "Shutting you out, Daniel? Was I shutting you out when I spent 3 hours cooking you a Mother's Day lunch? Was I shutting you out when Clara called me a controlling old hag and a shrew at my own dining table, and you sat there silent, not saying a single word in my defense?" The question hung heavy in the air, piercing the veneer of concern. Daniel visibly flinched, his jaw tightening. Carol, ever the peacemaker, tried to intervene. "Eleanor, perhaps retirement has been stressful. You're not used to so much free time." Eleanor raised a hand, silencing her sister. "Don't diminish my intelligence, Carol. I am not stressed, and I am certainly not having a mental breakdown. I am simply clear-headed for the first time in years." She looked around the room, making eye contact with each family member. "Let me be very clear about what transpired. On Mother's Day in my home, Clara, your dear wife, called me a controlling old hag and a shrew. In front of my son. The revelation landed like a bombshell. Gasps rippled through the room. Sarah's eyes widened, and David looked genuinely shocked. Daniel attempted to speak. "Mom, she was upset." "Upset?" Eleanor cut him off, her voice ringing with newfound strength. "And you, Daniel, you were what? A mute spectator? A spineless shadow of the son I raised? For years I have poured my time, my energy, and a significant portion of my life savings into supporting you. And in return, I get disrespect and silence." Her gaze hardened, sweeping over the faces, some now looking uncomfortable, others truly bewildered. "I am tired of stepping back. I am tired of being an invisible hand. Do you know how much I've given them? Over $180,000. That's money I earned, money I saved, money that could have been for my own retirement, my own dreams. Instead, it went to luxury apartments and designer clothes, all while I received contempt." Daniel started to protest again, but Eleanor didn't let him. "And you, Daniel, do you remember the last time you called me just to chat, just to ask how I was doing, without a financial request hidden somewhere in the conversation?" "I don't." Eleanor took another slow sip of her wine, enjoying the quiet power of her words. "So no, I am not ill. I have simply stopped being your ATM. I am choosing for the first time in a long time to be a real parent, which means allowing my adult son to stand on his own 2 feet." A voice from the corner of the room, surprisingly firm, broke the stunned silence. Great Aunt Beatrice, her eyes twinkling, nodded slowly. "Good for you, Eleanor," she declared, her voice raspy but clear. "It's about time you found your backbone. You've been a doormat long enough." Clara's face flushed crimson. Aunt Beatrice, really? This is none of your business, she snapped, attempting to dismiss the elderly woman. Eleanor ignored Clara, turning her full attention back to Daniel. So, Daniel, she challenged, why don't you explain to your family why you and Clara needed my checks to build your lives? And while you're at it, explain why your wife feels it's acceptable to call your mother a controlling old hag for daring to question her spending habits. The room fell into a heavy, uncomfortable silence. The carefully constructed narrative of Eleanor's breakdown crumbled, replaced by the uncomfortable truth of Daniel and Clara's dependency and disrespect. The family members exchanged uneasy glances, the reality of the situation sinking in. The intervention had been a watershed moment. If you've been following my story, you know the truth came out clear as day. What happened next, however, was a silence I hadn't anticipated. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What would you do in my situation? Don't go anywhere because the plot twist you're about to hear changes everything. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. After that tense family dinner, Daniel and Clara's calls and messages abruptly stopped. 3 weeks of utter silence stretched before Eleanor, a quiet she had initially savored. She booked her long-anticipated Alaskan cruise, the itinerary a vivid promise of glaciers and fjords. She joined a local gardening club, finding camaraderie and shared passion among fellow enthusiasts. She even had a delightful dinner with Richard, a charming widower from her bridge club, whose easy laughter and thoughtful conversation were a refreshing change. Evelyn, her loyal friend, called regularly, her voice always laced with a knowing caution. Clara's not one to surrender easily, Eleanor, she'd remind her. Eleanor, however, chose to see the quiet as a sign of progress, a hopeful indication that perhaps finally they were learning to manage their lives without her constant financial cushion. She harbored a secret hope that Daniel and Clara were growing up, learning to stand on their own 2 feet, forced by circumstance to confront their reality. Then, one night, the doorbell chimed, a sharp, insistent sound that shattered the midnight stillness. Eleanor jolted awake, her heart pounding. Who could it be at this hour? Through the peephole, she saw a figure, hunched and disheveled. It was Clara. Her usually immaculate blonde hair was in tangles, her face pale, streaked with smudged mascara beneath red-rimmed eyes. She looked utterly defeated, a stark contrast to the perfectly composed woman Eleanor usually encountered. Hesitantly, Eleanor unlatched the door and let her in. Clara stumbled inside, collapsing onto the living room couch, burying her face in her hands. Daniel doesn't know I'm here, she whispered, her voice raw. Eleanor waited, a mixture of apprehension and morbid curiosity stirring within her. Clara looked up, her eyes pleading. Eleanor, I need your financial help. If I don't get it, Daniel's going to leave me. The words hit Eleanor with the force of a physical blow. Leave you? She repeated, her voice barely audible. What are you talking about? The idea of them separating had never even crossed her mind. Clara took a shaky breath. I have a problem, Eleanor, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. A compulsive shopping problem. I've been seeing a therapist since the money stopped. She diagnosed it. Eleanor felt a jolt of surprise. Clara seeing a therapist? Since she cut them off? A new piece of the puzzle clicked into place. A shopping problem? Eleanor asked carefully. Clara nodded, tears streaming freely now. It's bad, Eleanor. Really bad. She rummaged through her oversized designer handbag, pulling out a stack of envelopes. They were credit card statements, their contents horrifyingly clear. Page after page of maxed out balances, late payment notices, and soaring interest rates. This isn't even all of it, Clara confessed, her voice choked. It's over $87,000 in debt. She admitted she'd been hiding the full extent of it from Daniel, intercepting mail, creating a meticulously woven web of deceit to maintain her lavish facade. My therapist says it's a coping mechanism, Clara explained, her words tumbling out in a rush of desperation. For stress, for insecurity. My parents, they always gave me whatever I wanted to keep me quiet, to make me happy. And then you enabled it too, Eleanor. You just kept giving us money. I never had to face the consequences. When Eleanor stopped the monthly transfers, Clara admitted, everything fell apart. The collection calls began, accounts were frozen, and the carefully constructed illusion of their financial stability crumbled. Eleanor looked at the broken woman before her, a flicker of something akin to sympathy stirring in her chest. Not for the debt or the lies, but for the raw vulnerability of a soul stripped bare. "I have nowhere else to go," Clara confessed, her voice thick with despair. "My parents can't help me anymore. They barely manage their own bills. And my friends, they only stick around for the lifestyle, the shopping trips, the expensive lunches. They're gone the moment the money dries up." Eleanor watched her, a multitude of thoughts racing through her mind. "What exactly do you expect from me, Clara?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "Do you want me to pay off your $87,000 of debt? Do you expect me to save your marriage? Do you want me to tell you how to fix this? Would simply paying the debt truly change anything? Would it break the cycle of dependency and compulsive behavior, or merely postpone the inevitable?" Eleanor remembered Clara's past insults, her casual contempt, even as she readily accepted Eleanor's money. "You called me a controlling old hag, Clara," Eleanor reminded her gently. "You resented me, even as you took my checks." When Clara mumbled a barely audible apology. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Are you sorry for what you said, Clara?" Eleanor pressed. "Or are you sorry for the consequences of it?" Clara looked away, unable to meet her gaze. "I'm not going to give you any money, Clara," Eleanor stated, her voice unwavering. "And Daniel might need to leave you, not because I hate you or because I want to destroy your life, but because you both need to face reality. He needs to understand the true depth of your problem, and you need to understand the true cost of your actions." A flicker of Clara's old fire, though significantly diminished, flashed in her eyes. "You hate me, don't you? You just want to see me fail." "I don't hate you, Clara," Eleanor replied, her voice soft but resolute. "But I have learned that sometimes the most loving thing a person can do is to stop rescuing, to stop enabling." Clara burst into fresh tears, her threats now tinged with genuine fear. "He'll leave me, Eleanor. And what about grandchildren? You'll have them growing up in a broken home. Is that what you want?" Eleanor walked to the front door and opened it, letting the cool night air into the silent house. "What I will remember, Clara," she said, her voice filled with a quiet strength, "is that tonight I finally stopped being an enabler and started to be a mother." Clara, pausing on the threshold, turned back, her mascara-streaked face now etched with something that looked like genuine despair. I, I really am sorry, Eleanor, for everything. I don't know how to live differently." "You can learn, Clara," Eleanor replied, her gaze firm, "but not if everyone keeps making it easy for you to avoid it." 2 months had passed since Clara's desperate midnight visit, a stretch of time that had felt both long and liberating. The silence from both Daniel and Clara had been absolute, a stark contrast to the previous barrage of angry calls and manipulated concern. Eleanor had used the time to fully embrace her new chapter. Her Alaskan cruise was fully booked, her gardening club thriving, and she found immense joy in the quiet rhythm of her own life. She felt lighter, unburdened by the weight of their dependency, finally rebuilding a life that was truly her own. Evelyn still called occasionally, always asking, "Heard anything yet?" But Eleanor hadn't. She was just wheeling her suitcase to the front door, the scent of lavender from her garden drifting in, when the doorbell chimed. She paused, a flicker of surprise, then looked through the peephole. It was Daniel. He looked older. Lines of stress were etched around his eyes, and his shoulders, usually slumped, seemed to carry a heavier weight. His gaze fell upon her luggage, and a look of apprehension crossed his face. Eleanor opened the door. "Daniel," she said, her voice neutral. "Mom," he replied, his voice a little hoarse. "I was afraid you wouldn't see me." "I would have answered," Eleanor confirmed, stepping back to let him in. As he entered, his eyes swept over her living room, pausing. Eleanor noticed he lingered on the changes she had made. More photographs of Arthur and her, fewer of him and Clara, a subtle reclaiming of her space. He took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. "Clara and we separated a month ago." Eleanor's lips parted in an automatic murmur of apology, a conditioned response to bad news, but Daniel quickly shook his head. "No, Mom, don't. It was a long time coming." He sank onto the edge of the sofa, his hands clasped tightly between his knees. I found out the full extent of her deception. He confessed that the debt wasn't just the $87,000 Clara had admitted to. It was over $100,000, spread across multiple cards, some taken out in his name without his knowledge. But then he dropped an even more shocking bombshell. She forged my signature on a second mortgage, on the apartment, to cover some of the debt. His voice was barely a whisper, filled with a profound shame. The bank found out. There's a fraud investigation. The words hung in the air, heavy and unbelievable. Eleanor stared at him, her mind reeling. The severity of Clara's actions was far beyond anything she had imagined. She met his gaze, a question forming on her lips. Are you here, Daniel? She asked, her voice quiet. Because you need legal help or financial help? She braced herself for the familiar plea. Daniel looked up, his eyes wide and earnest, stricken. No, Mom, I'm not here for money. I'm here to apologize. The words, simple and direct, landed with a raw honesty that vibrated in the quiet room. I'm so sorry, Mom, for letting Clara treat you the way she did, for expecting you to always be there to bail us out, for not being the son you raised. Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't try to hide them. He truly looked broken, but genuinely contrite. Eleanor remained silent, a lump forming in her throat. She wanted to rush to him, to comfort him, but something held her back. This moment of clarity, of genuine remorse, was too precious to interrupt. Daniel continued, his voice thick with emotion. When you cut us off, I was so angry at first. I blamed you, I blamed Clara. I was entitled. I just expected you to fix everything, like you always did. What changed, Daniel? Eleanor finally asked, her voice soft. He looked around the familiar room, then back at her. Everything. I moved out of the apartment last month. I took a second home, evenings and weekends, to start digging myself out. And then I started going through our finances, really looking at them, the waste, the irresponsibility. Not just hers, Mom. Mine too. I let it happen. I pretended not to see. He shook his head slowly. You were right, Mom, about all of it. He admitted that he had allowed himself to become dependent, that he had enabled Clara's disrespect towards his mother because it was easier than confronting his own weaknesses. Tears pricked Eleanor's own eyes. The years of pain, of silent frustration, began to melt away in the face of his genuine regret. It's not too late, Daniel, she said, her voice thicker with emotion. It's not too late to fix things between us. It's not too late to become the man I always knew you could be. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded check. This isn't much, Mom, he said, offering it to her. It's $1,200. It's a start. I promise you, I'm going to pay you back every single penny. Eleanor looked at the check, then at her son. He was still Daniel, but there was a newfound maturity in his eyes, a humility she hadn't seen in years. He wasn't the boy she had rescued. He was a man taking responsibility. Daniel, she said gently, pushing the check back towards him. Keep it. Use it to get back on your feet. This was never about the money, son. It was about respect. It was about boundaries. It was about you becoming the man I knew you could be. Daniel buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I missed you, Mom, he choked out. Eleanor reached out and gently stroked his hair, a gesture she hadn't performed in years. I miss the real you, Daniel, she confessed. Just then, the honk of a car horn sounded from outside. Her car service had arrived. Daniel quickly wiped his eyes, taking a deep breath. He stood up, picked up her suitcase, and carried it to the car for her, just as he used to when he was a boy seeing her off on a trip. Can we have dinner when you get back? He asked, his voice hopeful. Eleanor's heart swelled. I would love that, Daniel, she replied, a genuine smile gracing her lips. Before she got into the barn, Daniel looked at her, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. I've also enrolled in financial counseling, he revealed, and I'm seeing a therapist too, to figure out why I let things get so out of hand. I'm so incredibly proud of you, Daniel, Eleanor said, squeezing his arm. He offered a weak smile. You taught me courage, Mom. You just did it in a way I never expected. As the car pulled away, Eleanor looked back. Daniel stood on the curb, waving, a solitary figure in the fading light. But this time, he wasn't a child waiting to be rescued. He was a man, standing on his own, with a future that, for the first time in a long time, looked bright with the promise of genuine connection and growth. That night, as the grand cruise ship slowly pulled away from the bustling port, Eleanor stood on the deck, the cool sea breeze rustling her hair. She watched the glittering tapestry of city lights gradually shrink and fade into the distant horizon. The familiar skyline, once a symbol of her life's responsibilities, now simply represented a fading past, replaced by the vast open expanse of the ocean. A profound sense of peace settled over her, a lightness she hadn't felt in years. She had spent so long supporting others, tirelessly tending to their needs and desires, that she had inadvertently neglected her own. Her dreams, her aspirations, her very self had been placed on the back burner, always simmering but never quite coming to a boil. She realized now with crystal clarity that true love wasn't limitless enabling. It had boundaries, it expected respect, and it certainly didn't drain her dry. It nurtured, it uplifted, and it allowed for mutual growth, not one-sided dependency. She thought back to Mother's Day, to Clara's venomous words, calling her a controlling old hag, or Mara, as the ancient tales might say. At the time, it had been a dagger to her heart, but tonight she saw it differently. That insult, that moment of raw disrespect, had been the catalyst. It had been the moment that truly set her free, forcing her to confront a reality she had long avoided. Without that painful awakening, she might still be trapped in a cycle of silent resentment and financial drain. The ship's majestic horn sounded, a deep, resonant bellow that echoed across the water, signaling a new adventure ahead. Glaciers, fjords, the pristine wilderness of Alaska. These were the new experiences that awaited her, funded by the money she had once believed was destined for Daniel and Clara's endless consumption. Her saved money, carefully nurtured over years, was now funding her postponed dreams. The thought brought a genuine smile to her lips. Just then her phone buzzed, a soft vibration against her hand. It was a text from Evelyn. "Bon voyage, my dear friend. Remember, you don't owe anyone your joy." Eleanor smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. Evelyn, always knowing exactly what to say. With a newfound confidence, Eleanor typed her reply. Lesson learned. Finally. As the last sliver of the shoreline vanished beneath the moonlit waves, Eleanor made a silent, solemn promise to herself. Never again would she mistake sacrifice for love. Never again would she confuse healthy boundaries with cruelty. She vowed never to let anyone make her feel guilty for valuing herself, for prioritizing her own well-being and her own happiness. If that made her a Mara in someone else's story, then so be it. She accepted it, knowing that in her own story, the one she was now writing, she was finally, gloriously free.